Welcome. Thank you for coming today. As Dan mentioned, my name's Mark Wilson. Now, if you look at Wikipedia and you search for Mark Wilson on Wikipedia, there are 17 notable, and I need to use that word, notable Mark Wilsons listed in Wikipedia. I am not one of those 17, yet. So a long time ago, I came up with a little phrase or handle that if you want to find me on any social network, just do a search for developer infra. That, for the most part, will return me. Now, depending upon which search engine you use, sometimes they reverse that and will show you infrastructure developers results, which is kind of odd, but whatever. You'll find that picture just about everywhere, or a picture of something related to Disney. I am an employee here at Logical Advantage, and I know this comes as a surprise, but we are hiring. So if you are interested in possibly joining us, or if you're interested in looking, Matt, I invite you to contact me. I have my email address on the first and last slide. You're welcome to send me an email, send me your resume, and I'll hook you up with the folks who actually do that. I am not involved in any way in the hiring process. Little disclaimer. Also, as Dan mentioned, I'm very active in the community. I absolutely love the developer community here in Charlotte. The two big things that I'm involved with are the Enterprise Developers Guild, which is mostly a .NET-focused user group, meets the fourth Tuesday of every month. Down at Microsoft, that's their link. And then we used to have a code camp every year. Before that was like twice a year, but we kind of outgrew the venue and the whole code camp concept, so we created a new event called Spark Conference. It is held in the spring. We did it the first weekend in June. We're going to try to do it again next year, the first weekend in June. So definitely go out to sparkconf.org and join the newsletter, follow the social media links, and you'll get on those announcements. So, enough of the overview. You're here to learn about authentication using tokens for AngularJS, OWIN, ASP.NET, Web API, and identity. And that really long title can be boiled down to two different things, really. It's authentication, which is who you are, versus authorization, what you can do. And in this particular talk, we're only going to focus on the authentication side, because the authorization can be a whole talk in and of itself. I could have you here for the entire rest of the day if we wanted to cover everything in depth. But since we're only supposed to do lunch, so you can get back to your real jobs, just authentication. So there's two common approaches to authentication. There's a cookie-based approach, which is decades old, widely used, and it's typically the default option for new projects, particularly if you're using Visual Studio. But it has a bunch of cons, and security are the three big cons with cookies. There's man-in-the-middle, cross-site scripting, and cross-site request forgery. And you can guard against two of those, the man-in-the-middle and the cross-site scripting, using proper flags on cookies and by using HTTPS. But when it comes to cookies, cross-site request forgery is very difficult to guard against. There are there is code that you can add to your project. It's a lot of code, and it's not guaranteed. So I think that was kind of the emphasis, or one of the emphasis, in coming up with a second approach, which is token-based. And token-based has a lot more pros, which we'll dig into a little bit more. But the main, I guess, pro is it has fewer security cons. You still have to worry about cross-site scripting in a token-based authentication approach, but it's relatively easy code to add to your project. It's not that hard.
If you use HTTPS, can you?
Yeah, well, you definitely should use HTTPS regardless, but you'll still have some cross-site. So the pros, we can expand those out, and I guess again the big ones: stateless, scalable servers, mobile-friendly. Cookies are possible on mobile phones, but they're not always 100% supported. Tokens, everyone's been pretty much supporting that for the most part. Not saying you can't do cookies, but. And then, of course, the security protection. And it is, some argue it's faster, because it's a smaller footprint, typically. OK, so let's take a look at a kind of a demo that you guys can look at when you go back to your office or homes and want to dig in a little bit deeper. We found a great website called, or it's a series of blog articles called Token-Based Authentication Using ASP.NET Web API 2, OWIN, and Identity by this MVP. I'm not going to try to murder his name by pronouncing it, but he does an excellent job of stepping through the very simple, basic setup that you would need in order to get this working. And our the code that we have used has relied heavily on this 5-part demo. He walks you through the server side. He then walks you through the client side, and then starts adding in, let's see, I lost, there you are. Let me close this. There we go. Go away. Oh, come on. He walks you through, I think it's 5 steps here, or 5 parts, to give you the really basic, rudimentary building blocks that you need in order to get this working. And the end result is a website that looks like this. He put a little styling behind it. As you can see, you can either log in, or if you want to sign up with a new user ID and password, you can. Or you can connect using social media. And he's set up 2 of them, one for Facebook and one for Google+. And if I have this correct, log in, and it's a very simple website. Focus again just on the authentication portion. He has pretty much a hard-coded orders page that requires the authentication. And then, of course, if you
Control plus that to make it bigger.
Sure. There you go. Not a whole lot to see in this website, but if you check the checkbox to use refresh tokens, then this page is enabled. which allows you to make a server request to refresh your token and get a new one back, and then be able to access the data again. And then we'll just log out. So it's fairly simple. Digging into it, one of the things that I really like about it is his approach. It is not a file, new project, and load the entire ASP stack on it. He starts with an empty web project. And as a matter of fact, you don't actually need to check the web API checkbox like he has in this picture. And you don't set up authentication. There's no authentication. It's just a blank, simple project, which then, as you go through the as you go through the code in the blog, you're going to add 7 NuGet packages. Now, some of these NuGet packages have other dependencies which they'll bring in, but it's only 7, and the last 2 are only needed in your authentication API server project. So only technically 5 are being used in your core site. So once you get everything set up and you have a working project, at least on the server side, what you're going to end up with is this example token here. And I will zoom in so that you can see. An access token it's just JSON. Now, what you put into it is, of course, up to your choice. But typically, you're going to have an access token, which is your encrypted little piece of data, followed by, or including, a token type, in this case bearer, expires in, which is the number of seconds till the expiration, and when it was issued and when it expires. Now, like I said, you can add more. You can add anything you want. You can, within your token itself, you can pack any information or encrypt any information you want.
Mark, are they using any of those NuGet packages JWT, or are they rolling out their own?
They are. JWT. No, I don't think they're not taking that approach. I don't think. Okay, so once you call and you get a token from the server, you got to store it somewhere. This is assuming you're using AngularJS or a single page application. You got to stick it somewhere. A common place to do that's in local storage, which you control the key, so you can define that any way you want. But you could stick it, conceivably, in a, I wouldn't recommend it, global JavaScript variable. Or you could put it in a cookie, but that's kind of defeating the whole purpose of why you're using tokens, I feel, in the first place. But it is a place you can store things. As far as your Angular side, making an API call, if you use the convention of creating a service to call your API, you will notice that there's no special code here to make your calls. You don't want to put any token handling code within your services, because you end up duplicating that code a whole bunch of times. So what you end up doing is creating an interceptor. And this is an excellent way to handle your pre and post call API calls. So what you end up with is a little factory, if you will, that before every request is sent to the server, it's going to go into your local storage, look for the authorization data key, or whatever your key is. If it comes back with something, it's going to add a authorization header automatically to your call with the token attached. And then let's say this is the first call or your token expired. Right down here is how it handles any responses coming back. So you might have a 401 that gets returned saying, no, you're not authorized. So you can, if you're using refresh tokens, you can use some code here to say, OK, go try again and refresh my authorization. And that may work. Or you may just opt, if you don't want to use refresh tokens, you may just opt to say, let's log out, let's send them to the login and reject the API request. And that is a very nice consolidated, everything you need is right here, which who doesn't love that? On your API controllers, one approach you can use is just simply add an authorize at the very top. If you don't want to do that, if you have an existing application that you're adding this token-based authentication, there is some code that you can add to the project that says make all API calls required, and that's what we use, so that we don't have to go, oh, we forgot to add this, and it's wide open. Every call made to our API endpoint has to be authorized or it gets rejected. But it's fairly simple. And if you're not authorized, as you guys most likely know, you never get to the method. You're rejected. ASP.NET is very good in handling that. Now, one thing you do have to do, in the blog articles, he starts by creating one API endpoint that contains both the authentication server components and the web API data, basically your resources or whatever you're trying to get to. Then in the very last step, he separates that. So, and the trick when you do that, when you want to separate, and we highly recommend that you do build these separately, of course, is you're going to have to create your own machine key and put that into each config file. Now, please do not use the same machine key for your dev and your prod. Keep them separate. Don't open up a security hole for yourself. But there is, if you Google with Bing or Bing with Google, how to create a manual machine key. There's a PowerShell script that you run, or actually there's a couple different approaches, but I think the PowerShell script seems to be the favorite right now. And it'll generate everything that you need, which is a decryption key, a validation, and a validation key. And cut and paste, add that in to every config file that you have.
And if you run the PowerShell script, it actually produces that XML exactly, and you just have to paste it in.
Yes. Yeah, it makes it very easy. All right, so again, we can go into the code if you want at the end of the presentation a little bit deeper, but definitely it is a good article. It covers the very basic, fundamental, what you got to do to get it working. So I highly recommend going out there, and I will have this. Well, we're recording the presentation, but I'll have the slides available so that you can get to them and actually click on the hyperlink that's at the very bottom, as well as the resources at the end.
I don't know if you throw this in at the end or not, but if you're going to follow his article, absolutely go to his GitHub, because his snippets of code within his article don't necessarily have all the references you need.
Yes.
So you
Yeah.
can paste the code in and it won't work, and then you get, but if you go to the GitHub, you can then, it'll have all the code out there.
Yes, I meant to mention that. Yes, he has most of the code, but there are a few things he leaves out, in which you'll paste it in and you'll immediately know, oh, it doesn't work because it doesn't build. And all of this code's on GitHub. He's also, I believe, he's had a couple of pull requests since then to fix various issues that might have come up. One of them being properly giving credit to, another project which we'll mention needed proper credit to who created the code. All right, so some lessons learned using this and this first part. Definitely, absolutely, if we can't drill this home enough, use HTTPS, please. This is plain, clear text over the wire, regardless of what you're doing. So if you want to be secure, you got to go secure. So please spend a little bit more money and configuration time to configuring and get that set up. Forms authentication is really, really simple out of the box. Which is mostly what he has set up through the demo. The third-party logins, while possible, are much more challenging, because every third-party site that you want to use their authentication for, like Facebook and Twitter and Google+, they all have a slightly different implementation. So it's not, don't think of it as you can do one and then copy paste to get everyone else. Every single provider that you want to use is going to be an effort in and of itself.
You at least have to get API keys, right? For a lot of those things, reach into the one.
Yeah, there's some basic stuff that you can get, and actually, somewhat it's just making the call to connect and get the authorization is good. But then what they don't necessarily give you is the code. When you call like Facebook, you're going to be given a key. Then you can take that key and make a secondary call to get the goods. That isn't given. That's all custom stuff that you got to figure out and battle with. But if you just want to go, is this a person? Yeah, that's a person. Are they valid?
I think there's an Angular plugin for Azure AD that makes this really easy.
Yeah, no, Azure AD is, well, of course, because it was created by Microsoft, they support it, and yes, that is much easier, but it's still a login. Yeah. So do keep that in mind. This is an Active Directory. Yeah, we'll get to that.
Be very careful with Azure AD and AD properly, because Azure AD is proprietary. It's not even LDAP compliant. So if you're doing a project that's going to bite you, if the team decides to go down Azure AD and then they say, we also want to be backwards compatible with AD.
These are separate things.
Yeah, they want to support that. They've already made it very clear that Azure AD is a completely proprietary implementation. Yeah. Nothing like LDAP or nothing compliant with your standard AD on-premise.
Yeah.
Fully sized.
Yep. Another thing that you're going to see is entity framework. A lot of the demos and the examples and the code, how to make this work is going to use entity framework. Now, some shops like ours do not typically use entity framework unless our customer or client wants that. So if you want to go off script and use, what were we using? Dapper, thank you. To use Dapper, you're going to have to write a lot more code. But it's not hard. We'll get into that a little bit later in this talk. in how you can use something like Dapper. Custom grant types, I made that note. One of the things that I'm going to show a little bit later on, you can create custom grant types. I'm struggling to get one of them working. I would like for, we have a requirement on one project where you do log in using proper Active Directory. They don't want to prompt for an ID and a password. They want single sign-on. So we found a project that works with this for single sign-on, but it's a separate branch. You're making more true API calls rather than going down this, the true OWIN token path. It's a slightly different path. I was hoping to get a custom grant type to work to merge them back together, but I'm still not quite there yet. But it's something to look into. You can use it. Final bit of details or lessons learned. While this is, and we'll be upfront, this is some great code that this guy's made available on his website and through GitHub. There's questions whether it's truly production ready. There could be security holes or ways that a hacker could penetrate and get into your systems. So just be aware that this is very baseline, very simple. If that is a concern of yours, I listed here several other places where you might want to go and look at their offerings. Auth.com, OAuth.io are both services that basically you can pay like per user and get essentially everything working without you having to code anything other than a little bit of wire up within your app. You might also want, if you don't want to pay for a service, you might want to look into Think Texture Identity Server. It is, I think it's open source, and it is a kind of it's a server that you can install and have running. They have, I think, a free version and a paid version. Don't quote me on that, but. And then you can also look at .NET OpenAuth and Spring Social for .NET. So there's some other options out there. I encourage you to look at them because, again, is this production ready? You probably want to dig into the code. There's nothing in the code that you need to be scared of. It's not calling some remote server in China. But I do believe that there might be a hole that a hacker could exploit. So let's talk about, well, before I move on, any questions that weren't asked? None? Okay, yeah. Just jump in anytime you have questions. Let's talk about some OAuth Refresh Tokens. It's one of the options that he adds in, and it does add a lot of complexity to the code. It's a way of kind of making it so that you don't have to log in so many times. In terms of the token, it really only adds two additional lines. A refresh token, which, as you can see, looks kind of like a GUID because it is, and then a client ID, which is optional. The refresh tokens work as what you've done is you've created within your database a record of this particular user logging in. And you can search for it using this GUID. And then when your refresh token, rather than setting it for hours, you'd want to set it for, say, 15, 20, 30 minutes. You want it short. And the reason why you want it short is perhaps you're in a corporate environment and you want to be able to without having the user log out and log back in to get additional capabilities, for example, to get access to something new or to revoke their ability to access something, this will automatically handle that functionality. So you can go and change what their access is, and then when their token expires, it's going to go make a call to the to your API server, see that yes, you have a refresh token, and yes, you have a standard token. It'll use a standard token to create a new token, reattach all the new capabilities or whatever, and then send you on the way. You can also use this to knock people out of the system for, let's say, maintenance, system maintenance. So you can revoke their refresh token, and then once their access token expires, they wouldn't be able to get back in because you would lock down your login form. So it's kind of a cool way to do that.
So does it matter how often you make that expire?
No. Now, you can make it expire every 5 minutes. It's just going to be, there's a little bit more processing on the server side and a few more calls between the client and your server. Because you'll get a rejection. Your token expires. Let's say you put it in 5 minutes. Your token expires. You're going to get a 401 back. It's if you add in the code to do an automatic refresh. It's going to make another call, do some logic, and send you back a token, and then you'll go back and make your call again. So there's a little bit of a lag the user would see, but it's your choice. I think 15 minutes is probably good. 30 at the most. You want it short, really. But for example, our project, since it's single sign-on, we just do basically expire it at midnight and don't worry about it. So we're not even using refresh tokens.
One thing that's really cool about doing either of those is because you're using interceptors. In Angular, you can automatically put in a busy indicator. When the interceptor starts and when the interceptor completes, you can automatically turn it on for any web API call. That makes it really nice just to consolidate, hey, something's happening on the server. I don't need to write that code. My developers don't have to do that for every single page. It's automatically abstracted in the interceptor level itself.
So lessons learned, I think I covered most of these. Again, some cons. It is adding a lot more complexity to the solution. It's about twice as much the code, double the code. Plus you're adding in database tables and things like that. You can get all fancy if you want. Doesn't work for third-party logins. Keep that in mind. Although I think you could probably manipulate things such that if you built your own custom solution, you could do that using third parties. But that's not really kind of the point. Third-party logins are meant to be a little bit longer lasting anyways. Any questions? All right. Moving on. As I mentioned, custom ASP.NET identity providers. If you're not using Entity Framework, which I can fully understand, until the next version comes out, which hopefully will be fast and light, or at least that's supposedly what's going to happen. You're gonna need to create a custom provider. And also, I guess I should mention, also, if you don't want to use a GUID as your primary key, if you want to use an ID, an integer, as your user ID, you're going to end up creating your own custom provider. But it is relatively simple to do that. This website here, or this web link, overview of custom storage providers for ASP.NET Identity walks you through everything you need to do and everything you need to code. And it's very simple to choose. Maybe you don't want to do, let's say you do standard forms-based login. Maybe you don't want to support a password recovery that is using text messaging, or something like that. You simply just don't implement that interface. You don't add that interface, and you don't have to worry about it. So this document walks you through that, and I highly recommend looking at it. What you basically create is managers and stores access, of course, your data. So your application is going to work through a manager to get to a store to get to your data. One of the things we discovered as we were looking for code to help us with this was there were a lot of people who created custom providers, but they were skipping the communication through the manager and going straight to the store. And that is wrong. You don't want to use anyone's code who is skipping that and trying to go straight to the database. Because a great example that we found was someone's code which looked great and it had everything we wanted. You would try to add a user, but it was trying to update the database with the new user's email address before the record existed. And that was because they, again, were going outside of what you were supposed to use. They were going straight to the store, and then the store was making direct database calls when it shouldn't. So be careful with that. A user manager is configured within, come on, this way. Within a particular spot. And it's completely configurable. As you can see, you can choose things like, how do you want the usernames? What requirements do you have on your password? How long, or do you want to lock people out after X number of attempts? Things like that.
What's the difference here between this and some of the templates
They pretty much all have this. If you're going to use identity, yeah. If you're going to use identity, you're going to have this. But most of the time, the templates won't have all of these. This is like everything that you can configure. Most of them will only show like a password length of 8 and like one other piece of information. But this is, if you go through the website, it tells you, okay, these are your 2 options for user validation, your 2, 4, 5 options for password validation. So it walks you through everything. Now, ideally, you don't hardcode this stuff. You put it in a config or a database or something like that. Something to add for your code. And as I mentioned, a user manager calls a user store. A user store is what does a gets and sets. That's the best way to think of it. Think of a class in memory that represents a user or a role or something. Your database can use any field name you want. let's use Great Plains for example. You know, the user table is going to be 6 or 8 random characters. The field names are going to be equal number of random characters. You don't know what the ID field is. It's not named ID because no one uses that. So the user store is kind of, think of it as mapping. It's a getter and setter. The manager is going to make method calls in the user store to say, here's the email address, here's the username, here's the password. And that allows you to wire it up with whatever your domain looks like, whatever your database looks like. And then the data source is going to, if you use Dapper, take that and make the call into the database to either find the user or validate their password or whatever. And again, you can see right here, let me zoom in, the user store, again, just implements a bunch of interfaces. So, do you want an email store, a lockout store, whatever? Do you want two-factor authentication? If you don't want that, just leave that out and don't implement those methods. So some lessons learned. As I said, it's actually pretty easy to create. We created our own because we couldn't find one for Dapper that we liked. And if I ever have time and get around to it, we're going to open source our Dapper provider. Because, like I said, we just didn't find one that was to our liking. Creating your own allows you to use an integer. Again, please interact with managers, not directly with the store. And don't alter the database in your getter and setter methods. Don't try, when you're updating an email address, don't try to call the database and update it. Wait until the update method is called. And then, yes, in your configuration, you're going to want to be sure to use a single instance per request, which I'll walk you through. Any questions on that piece?
You mean single instance of the manager?
Yes, yes. All of this, you want a singleton basically for the request. All right. Moving on. Mixed authentication. So we had a really interesting project that we're currently working on, which, as I mentioned, they want single sign-on. They want to be able to go to the website and not get prompted to log in. So there is a way that it can be done, and it's using a project called OWIN Mixed Auth, which creates essentially a third-party Windows login provider. The code's available on GitHub. This is the one that I know has been updated. So definitely, if you choose to use something like this in your environment, always make sure you go back after you get your authentication working. Check and make sure there haven't been any security updates. But this, like I said, it kind of mimics a third-party login. You're going, the way this function works is when you make a call to the API, it recognizes that you're not logged in, sends you through the authentication pipeline, It asks the client, generally the browser, and the server are going to do some handshaking with your traditional Windows authentication. Once that's accepted, the username, of course, is available because it's kind of using cookie-based authentication in the background, which then you can use that to go through your system and query, is this a user I know, and what are their capabilities or their access rights? Some things that we learned about it. Even the creator admits this is a bit of a proof of concept. It works, but it's a hack. Straight out, it's a hack. And it's kind of interesting how, if you dig into the code, how they're making this work. It does enable Windows authentication, but it also requires everything on the server side, of course, to have that too. So you have to enable that with an IIS or whatever you're using. We had to make some small little code changes to get it to work the way we wanted. I'm going to try to submit that back to this guy as a pull request, see if he's any bit interested. Another thing, the demo or his example uses a pop-up window. So you'll go to a page, and then a pop-up window is going to load. We were able to take that and hide that in an iframe. It is an option, and that's one of the things I'm going to offer back. And as I said, it is using cookies behind the scenes. So you're going to see that there's a cookie that gets attached to the request.
Any security concerns with putting in an iframe as far as where the authentication is located, cross-domain? I know some of the browsers are a little more strict about iframing than they used to be. Yeah.
There's the iframe is fidgety, I guess you could say. There are times where it doesn't want to work, whereas we generally didn't have the problem with the pop-up.
Pop-ups are made that way. You see them in ads all the time where
Yeah.
they load stuff from a different domain than what you're actually looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, and it kind of, when the server's up and running, like when you're not starting it fresh off of Visual Studio, the pop-up flashes real quick. It is an API call. It's a data call, not a content call. So it doesn't ever render anything. You're just making a call. It comes back with a bit of data. You redirect and get your token.
We tried doing it just in JavaScript, doing an XML HTTP request with a try catch around it.
We could try that. There was somebody suggested that, and there was an issue with that where you weren't guaranteed to get a response back using that option. And I didn't dig into what they were talking about.
Thing, maybe?
Maybe. Actually, yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe in Chrome it's more secure, and IE would just let you do whatever.
If I remember, I think IE would work in Chrome. Let's say you suck.
Yes.
Yeah.
Doesn't Chrome return the 200 that it's down, but then the browser just shuts down and you don't know what's going on?
I think, yeah, that might be what happens.
So you have to wrap the outgoing data call back so that the inbound, so when the return is due, it's got a JavaScript wrapper around it, so then Chrome goes, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's it. I was like, I knew you. Yes. It's a little more complicated.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think it could be done. You definitely need to guard that code and test it heavily. All right. Believe it or not, I'm kind of at the end. Some resources. Fiddler is your friend, or at least it was my friend. You want to be able to watch these calls going back and forth to debug what doesn't work and why it doesn't work. And I found Fiddler to be a little bit better than Chrome DevTools, which naturally is better than IE DevTools.
One caveat we've run into with doing this stuff with ADFS, then ADFS has a security mechanism to not allow the man-in-the-middle attack to happen.
Yes.
Or just you will not see those authentication things coming through.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. But if you're not using that, in our calls, just Active Directory and general forms authentication, you can see them. So, yeah.
With Postman, for example, just going straight into the API?
Yes, yeah, you can use Postman. In the blog, he's using Postman for those, I believe. To test the, when you create the first part of 5, you create the server side with no client. So I think he's using Postman to make the calls to say, is this working? Yeah, it works. And you can get your token and see. And then the 3 kind of sites that we use to fill everything out, the token-based authentication blog or series of blog articles, the custom identity provider, and then the mixed authentication, if you need to be able to support Windows authentication. That's everything I have. Again, my email address is right there. Send me your resume. Please. There's a bonus. Please. Yeah. There might be a bonus. And again, if you Google with Bang Bang with Google Developer Infra, or go to developerinfra.com, you'll find me and all of my, or most of my social links. Not very active website, but it's where you can go to find this. And I'll upload this presentation to I think I use SpeakerDeck, which I have a link on my website to go to my SpeakerDeck, or just Developer Infra.
Comment in the meetup group too.
Yes.
The link is
Yeah. But I'll make this available while we are working on making the video available.
Can you explain, I know it's just a while back, but I wanted to see how we went with everything. Where is the AngularJS, the interceptor, how's that wired up exactly? Is that tied to an event? Is there an event for when HTTP requests go out?
Yeah, you set it up in
Basically adding it to $HTTP.
Where did we do that?
Going through here, you're actually adding a step in the process of the $HTTP element that's introduced to make all your calls.
Is that in the config.js?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll set it up with like a module like you do everything else.
Yeah. You wire that up in your, app.js or whatever,
Yeah.
Whatever you use to say, I have this service available. And then every call goes through here. Every API call goes through here by default.
So you just do your regular HTTP,
Yep.
got the rest of your code and your other services or your project.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Let's see where we at. Yes. All you have to do $get to API. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So your service code can remain the way it is. Very light. Very simple. Very direct to getting what it is you're wanting. And then the interceptor, such a gorgeous thing, handles everything else automatically. And then as you can see, you can add in handling. If you want to handle other codes, for example, if you want to be able to handle a 500 or something, this would allow you to be able to do that
But
here.
what he was just talking about is in our, we're doing an Angular SharePoint project right now, and right now we're having to have some specific SharePoint headers we're having to pass in for all our requests, including, again, X request digest and things. And we could totally use that.
Yes, yeah.
to do
Well, you could do that, but you could also create another. You can have multiple interceptors.
Even in the
Yeah.
dollar sign HTTP, if you do whatever verb, get, post, whatever, there's an overload. The third argument, so you do the URI content if you're doing a post. The third parameter will actually allow you to pass in a payload of headers, anything else that you want to do dynamically just for that request. So you can have your standard, this is our for across the whole site, but then individual ones like what you're describing, I do that a lot. I pass in, okay, I know this page needs to have this special edition, I'll just have it right there.
But basically, every single one of them, if it's a get, this is what we need to do. If it's a post, this is what we need to do. And we could actually just probably write an interceptor, detect whether it's a get or a post, and do the magic
Yes.
based on that.
Yes. Yes.
If you're
Yeah, that-
using like Postman, you have to configure every API with the header, with the token and stuff in it, or do you make like
Yeah.
an interceptor and say,
For Postman?
But if you're testing with Postman, the moment you set up your headers, once you switch your verbs, those headers remain. So you can, in fact, you can even go further and create collections. Once you know that that's a valid test, save it, and so you can just click back on it and do it again.
It saves every request you make out of Postman down the left-hand side, so you can go find a previous one, click on it, tweak what you need to tweak, and then resend it.
Send it, yeah.
It also provides search.
Yeah.
Now, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we were bootstrapping the OAuth stuff, I used Postman to create all of my users because once I used it to test to make sure that the registration feature worked, and I just went in and created all my users really because we needed a handful of test users.
Any other questions? Comments? I was going to ask, has anyone tried to implement token-based authentication? Okay. And how many of you who raised your hands were successful? Okay. Yeah.
After a lot of money.
Yes.
He,
Yeah,
he says it's fairly simple, but he spent several weeks.
Weeks? I think it was
Well,
months.
Working out the issues.
Yeah. Of course, you know, for our particular project, we had some unique things, which was like the single sign-on using Windows authentication, and trying to tie that into a token-based authentication. And it's like, okay, this is weird. How do you get this to work? You know, if we were using Forms authentication with Entity Framework, I would have been done in a week. We were not using Forms authentication, not using Entity Framework, but instead Dapper.
Yeah, because
Finding.
yeah, it's been too easy.
Oh yeah, yeah, it would have been too easy. But you know, how do you create custom providers? Well, you know, the first thing we tend to do is go look on GitHub for somebody's open source example. You know, I found 5 of them. All 5 had issues.
Yeah.
One person was way over architected. It had entirely too much complexity. The one that I thought was great because it was readable, good, clean, simple code. They were making calls to the database when you shouldn't make calls to the database, and it's like, all right, I guess I got to do this on my own.
We used one on another project where we were using Mongo as the back end with the Mongo driver,
Yeah.
and it just plugged in and worked. So we had
Yeah.
good luck with that.
So if you're using a common thing,
Yeah.
use Mongo.
Yeah. Yeah.
We got a Pluralsight subscription. There's also a really good video on this topic by Deborah Durata.
Yes.
He walks you through all the steps, and I believe does do a second pass on how to do a custom project. Just making
Yeah, I
them
use
go and
somebody else that I use on the Pluralsight.
Yeah.
So between the default projects, when you choose single page application, which turns the account controller into API controller based.
Which I would never do.
Starting from that, because it generates all of the sample code. to the whole site, and then having a third project going where you're starting in.
Your actual project code, yes.
Right.
Yes, I did that too.
Justin had the question earlier about creating it through the standard templates, and you can do that, but the standard templates in Visual Studio assume that your OAuth and your website are all in the same.
Yes.
Same project. Same
And
project.
it
And-
assumes you're using cookies.
Yeah.
It was
But
like,
What I
why?
liked about this guy's was he was using all the OWIN stuff, and you went in and you, first of all, for me, because I like to understand how things work, you're putting together piece by piece, so I understood what was going in there.
Yes.
But the other thing is because it's OWIN, in the actual OAuth website that's going to handle the OAuth stuff for you, that's all that's in it. There isn't all this scaffolding stuff in here for all this MVC stuff and all these other, there's no CSS or content folder and stuff I'm never going to use because it's just my OAuth project. It's only got what I need to handle the OAuth stuff.
Yeah.
And it's,
Which we encourage.
which, if you're in an environment where you're going to have more than one website that needs security, if you follow this guy's thing and you break it out so OAuth is separate, then you can have one OAuth instance to be your single authenticator for all your websites you're doing. And it works out with this. And Mark didn't even get into claims, and that's a whole other.
Yeah, that, like I said, that's another presentation in and of
Yeah.
itself because you're gonna end up debating, do you want to add that to your token,
Which makes it.
a fat token?
Yeah.
And for our project, we're potentially getting down to the field, authorization on a field. So that's going to be a really big token because everything you add, adds to the length of the token. Or do you just keep your token simple? Say, this is the user and they're authenticated, and then when you make your API call, just have a base handler that says, here's the user, they're authenticated, now let me go get their resources or their
The other pattern we were looking at was if your app's big enough, you've got to have a lot of different permissions. You just make a separate call with their token and credentials to get the claims for the area of the app that you're in at that point, and you're just dealing with. That would be another. That would be another use for refresh tokens.
Yes.
Because you could force, if they're changing to a different area of the app, you could force a refresh, and they would know, and a piece of data says, oh, I'm in this area of the app now, so let's just put the claims I need for this area of the app in the token,
Yep.
use it, and then if they change context again, you could force to call a refresh to get, if you wanted to do that.
Yeah, no, we might end up doing
Makes
that.
the most sense.
Yeah.
You don't want to dump a whole bunch of stuff that's not, the login application's not what we're concerned about.
Yeah.
Right.
We end up rolling our own claims provider that actually passes it off to two different ADFS providers. We want to have a single login against two different ADFSs, and that was a little bit hairy, but similar concept.
Yeah.
There are two really popular libraries in Ruby that have been ported over for Angular. One's called CanCan, the other one's called Pundit. I use those extensively both in Angular and in Relic. I actually prefer to Microsoft's permissions membership provider of actually providing permissions. CanCan is older. Pundit is actually just a remake of it. There's CanCan 2 as well. But, you want to look at a really nice, elegant permissions where you can do it on demand. I recommend looking at what you guys have already done a long time ago.
Can you comment on the meetup with those? Yeah, I'd like to look at that. We're not in our project. We're not quite to the claims or permissions yet. So.
In his list of third-party, fully hosted solutions that he had up there, that Auth0 project or product is very good. They take everything into account. They actually have the problem that you had to solve on Remy with the Active Directory integration. They already solved that because the Auth0 guys were a couple of employees that worked for Microsoft, and they went off and did their product. And Microsoft actually uses Auth0 for some of their services internally on Azure.
Oh.
So, and they offer it on Azure. If you go to Azure, it's one of the things third party, you can say, add this to my project.
Project, okay.
But they've handled, they've gone through all the pain of a bunch of these border cases already in that project. Pretty sensitive.
Yeah.